Well, hey, everybody, this is Robert, and welcome to Outbreak News Interviews. Now, evidence over a period of time suggests that the common single celled parasite called Toxoplasma gondii may affect male fertility. Now, just last month, a study was published in the FEBS journal, that's the Federation of European Biochemical Societies, and it showed for the first time that human sperm lose their heads upon direct contact with the parasite. So, could this be affecting male fertility? Well, joining me to discuss this very interesting topic is Bill Sullivan, PhD. Dr. Sullivan is a professor of microbiology and immunology at Indiana University, and he's the author of an article on this exact topic in The Conversation. Dr. Sullivan, welcome to the program.
Hello, Robert. Thanks for having me on.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate you coming on. You're on the show because you have some expertise in Toxoplasma gondii. So can you give the audience a little bit about your background and your expertise with the parasite Toxoplasma gondii?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I guess you could say I have some expertise. I've been studying this parasite since I was a graduate student, which takes us all the way back to 1994. So the reason I've been studying it all these years is because I find this parasite, Toxoplasma, to be endlessly fascinating. While it doesn't cause overt symptoms of disease, it does remain in the brain and the heart and skeletal muscle tissue for the patient's life. And there's no cure for that chronic stage of infection. That is one of the major areas that my lab investigates at the Indiana University School of Medicine. And this parasite, it's infected a staggering number of people. As you said at the start of the program, it's very common, even though people haven't heard of it. They may be surprised to know that depending on where you look in the world, 30 to 50% of the world's population carries this parasite in their brain, and they don't even realize it. Mm-hmm. So it's fascinating in that sense. And the fact that so many people are carrying this parasite in their brain just underscores us researchers having to take a closer look at what it could possibly be doing to us. So cats are what we call the definitive host, Robert. This is the only organism on the planet, and we're talking about all kinds of cats, your household cat, panthers, leopards, Garfield, all of these cats, right? Toxo can infect all of them and undergo its sexual cycle, which means when the cat's infected, it expels oocysts or parasite eggs for about 1 to 2 weeks, and those are extremely infectious. But Toxoplasma can infect any nucleated cell in any warm-blooded vertebrate, which is a staggering number of hosts. Most parasites don't infect more than 1 or 2 hosts, but Toxoplasma can get into just about any animal. It's pretty fascinating from that perspective as well. Clinically speaking, it causes chronic opportunistic disease in humans. It also causes congenital infection, and that can produce pretty severe birth defects. It's an agricultural pest, especially in lamb, sheep. It causes a lot of abortion in those animals, so it can be devastating in that sense. Toxoplasma is also one of these hidden causes of food poisoning. Even in the United States, it kills dozens of people every year just from food poisoning alone. Another feature that I like to highlight when I talk about Toxoplasma is one that gets a lot of press, and that it causes bizarre changes in the body. And this speaks to why we're here today. Mm-hmm. Toxoplasma has only been aggressively studied I would say since the 80s and 90s, because that's when it gained notoriety as an opportunistic pathogen of AIDS patients, and really attracted a lot of researchers to start investigating it more rigorously. And what people have found is that this parasite lodged in the brain may be causing behavioral changes to its host. The best studies are done in rodent models, rats and mice, where they've actually been shown to lose their fear of cats, their major predator. And when they do that, of course, they're more likely to be eaten by the cat. And lo and behold, the cat is where Toxoplasma really wants to be. So if you look at that from an evolutionary angle, what Toxoplasma has done is kind of rewired the mammalian brain to make prey more susceptible to the definitive host and get parasites into the cat gut where it really wants to be. Raises the question, what might Toxoplasma be doing to people? It's in our brains too, just like it lodges in there in rodents. And it has, in fact, been correlated with human personality traits and certain behavioral changes. More terrifyingly, it's been correlated to neuropsychoses like schizophrenia and rage disorder. And then finally, the topic of our podcast today, this new possibility of interfering with male fertility.
All right, very good. And the way people contract it, most people know about, if you have a pregnant wife or whatever, you know about the litter box. And you mentioned food. I assume that's undercooked food. Mm-hmm. What other ways can somebody contract it?
There's three major ways, and you touched on a couple already. The first one would obviously be from cat feces. When an infected cat defecates, it expels billions of these Toxoplasma oocysts into the litter box, perhaps a sandbox, into the yard. And from there, it can get into gardens, perhaps unwashed fruits and vegetables. That's another way to contract these oocysts. Can also contract them from contaminated water. Swimming in fresh water or even salt water that has these oocysts present can be another way to contract them. Another hidden danger would be shellfish. These are filter feeders in the ocean. And if oocysts are present there, usually from like cat runoff that gets into the waterways, people who eat like raw oysters or raw clams, they can be inoculating themselves with an unusually high dose of oocysts. And that is one of the potential lethalities of Toxoplasma food poisoning. Another one, as you alluded to, is when the parasite gets into other animals, it insists in the flesh of these animals. And if we don't cook that meat sufficiently, we could acquire Toxoplasma infection that way. It is thought to be just as an important route of transmission as the cat would be. And the final one is mother to child. And this is a rather devastating one. If a person ingests Toxoplasma, becomes infected for the first time in their life, during pregnancy, the parasite can cross the placenta, and that can cause either a miscarriage or rather devastating birth defects, depending on when during the pregnancy the infection was acquired.
And as far as severe or fatal pathology, because you said so many people carry it, it's usually because of some immunocompromised situation they're in that they have that fatal outcome. Was it Arthur Ashe? Is that how he died?
That's correct. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. Good on you. Famous tennis star died from toxoplasmosis. And you're right. It is mostly known as an opportunistic parasite. Yeah. So many people during the course of their lives get exposed to Toxoplasma. They contract it and they don't even know about it because it's a stealthy infection and the immune system gets it under control quite quickly. Yeah. The catch is the immune system doesn't get rid of it. The parasite hides out in the brain and the heart in the form of these latent cysts. So if immunity deteriorates because of advanced AIDS, or even sometimes during organ transplantation or cancer chemotherapy, if you get immunosuppressed, no matter what the cause, these Toxoplasma cysts can reactivate and cause irreversible brain or heart damage. And now we have additional studies implicating that the parasite might hide out in male reproductive organs. And that is one of the reasons why we're here to discuss Toxoplasma today. But you're absolutely right. It really became much more of a dominant parasite during the height of the AIDS pandemic in the late 80s. And it was then, under rare circumstances, in these immunocompromised individuals, doctors started seeing this a manifestation of testicular infection. which was really unheard of, and it still remains rare today, but it provided evidence that Toxoplasma doesn't just get into the brain and the heart and skeletal muscle, it can get into male reproductive organs. And that's where it raises the question, well, if it can do that, does it have an effect on male fertility?
Yeah, and let's go ahead and jump into that part of the discussion. And the new study that I talked about in the intro, published in the FEBS journal, it states our findings suggest that T. gondii infection can have profound implications for male fertility by directly damaging spermatozoa and altering testicular and epididymal structures. Now, you've already kind of alluded to some of the history of this. What else do we know prior to this study concerning Toxoplasma and its effect on the male genitalia or the reproductive organs, or what do we know about that already prior to this study?
Yeah, that's a great question, because this study just didn't materialize out of nowhere. It was performed based on accumulating data over the past couple decades that suggested Toxoplasma may be affecting male reproductive organs, because it is known to disseminate throughout the entire body. So that possibility was always there. But again, once we started to see some cases in the literature of testicular toxoplasmosis, that sent up a red flag that maybe we should look at this a little more closely. Mm-hmm. So we have really good rodent models for Toxoplasma infection, looking at rats or mice, give them a dose of Toxoplasma. They react very much like humans do. They get a little scruffy, lose their appetite around day 6 or day 7, but they quickly recover, and then they seem perfectly fine. But their brain, if you look at it, is filled with these Toxoplasma cysts. People have also looked at the testes of these infected animals and found parasites there as well. My colleagues and I did a study in 2017 finding that Toxoplasma can encyst in a mouse prostate, which was rather alarming, because when you look at those infected animals, you also see inflammation of that prostate, probably brought on by the presence of those parasitic cysts. And as you know, inflammation of the prostate is a prelude to prostate cancer. So more work needs to be done to solidify that link. But again, it's further evidence that male reproductive organs can be infected by these parasites. People have also looked at the seminal fluid of infected animals, including humans, and found Toxoplasma can be present in semen as well. Sperm production is also diminished when you look at mice infected with Toxoplasma, when you look at rats infected with Toxoplasma, and when you look at rams, probably other animals too. Infected mice, as a consequence of this, have significant lower sperm counts and a higher proportion of sperm that are abnormally shaped. But until this new study, that's really not been reported very often in humans. Now, the real crux of the question is, okay, we can see the parasite in the male reproductive organs, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's doing anything with respect to fertility. It's just a correlation, and you're making some assumptions. So there was a small study done in China in 2005, and it found that sterile men are more likely to test positive for Toxoplasma than fertile men. It's not a smoking gun, but it's a correlation that's consistent with the evidence that's accumulating so far. There was another study done in Prague in 2021. Again, it's relatively small, but there were over 100 men infected with Toxoplasma analyzed, and 86% of them, just a very high percentage, had semen anomalies. So there's preliminary data out there that I think convinced the researchers of this new study to take a closer look at what is going on and whether there is a more robust mechanism that they can decipher using both rodent models and actual human samples.
Yeah, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about that study too. And what really caught my eye was the term headless spermatozoa. And is going on there. And I saw some of the photographs that you put in the conversation piece. So, Bill, can you talk about this latest research paper, its findings? What's the mechanism for this beheading? Whatever we know, what do we know?
Yeah, those are some pretty terrifying words, aren't they?
They are.
Talking about literally decapitated sperm, and sperm have that distinctive shape with a very clear head and tail. So you can imagine the heads just being popped off, and that's quite, that'll keep you up at night. It's the stuff of nightmares. But that study, which came out just this April, so it's relatively new, the researchers confirm that the Toxoplasma parasites can reach the testes. That's nothing new. We've known that before, but they confirmed it. And it's always nice to see an independent group get the same result. Right. It builds confidence that this really does happen. But in addition to the testes, they also found that it gets into the epididymis. The parasites can go there. And that's the tube where sperm actually mature and are stored. So if the parasites can access that canal, then they might have direct access to sperm. Okay, so that's important, and we're going to circle back to that. And this all happens within 48 hours of infection. So this happens very quickly. So what they decided to do, knowing that the parasite can go to the epididymis and maybe have direct contact with sperm, they did an experiment where they purified parasites and put them in a test tube with actual human sperm. And what they found when they did that, just after 5 minutes of mixing the parasites with the sperm cells, almost 25% of them lost their heads. And I love that phrase. That's the phrase the actual authors used in this paper. The sperm lost their heads. So yeah, the parasite seems to be attacking these sperm, which is what it would do to any other nucleated cell. Toxoplasma actively invades that cell and grows inside of it. And if you look at the pictures in this journal article, or you can look at the conversation piece because they're reproduced there, you can see that sperms that did maintain their head certainly look like they've seen better days. Yeah. They have holes in their head. They're all twisted. They're contorted. They're misshapen. Their tail isn't straight anymore. It just kind of is all bent into different directions. And of course, some of the sperm had, if they didn't have holes in their head, it looked like the head was completely lopped off from the tail. Mm-hmm. So the hole in the head suggests that the parasites were trying to invade the sperm, just like it would any other nucleated cell. But it probably can't get in there because the sperm is a lot smaller size than the cells that Toxoplasma would prefer. So it might drill the hole, but then abandon trying to get in. But that is obviously detrimental for the sperm cell itself. So what I've really found fascinating about this study, to kind of encapsulate it in a summary, was that they found Toxoplasma can go to the epididymis, at least in mice, which creates the possibility that they could be in direct contact with sperm. So when they did that experiment with human sperm, mind you, not another animal, with human sperm, that's when they were damaged or lost their head. And that's what I found to be particularly alarming about the study.
Yeah, that was so fascinating. So what are your thoughts on the research? I mean, this clearly needs to be followed up with more, right? But going back to your article, like from the beginning of your article, you were talking about the history of male fertility, that it's been dropping. And I was totally unaware of that. Do you consider this study a really good link to possible reduced numbers in, lower male fertility? I guess that's the word I'm looking for.
Well, I do think, given the gravity of the problem, male infertility rates have increased nearly 80% since 1990, which is really alarming. And a lot of people have not been made aware of this, as you yourself admitted. And I didn't know the statistic was that high. I knew rates were dropping globally, but I didn't know it was that high. There's great books written about that, and I encourage your listeners to go check them out. And you will find lots of people, lots of scientists trying to come up with explanations for why this is happening. At the end of the day, we don't know. And it might be a combination of these things, okay? So looking at Toxoplasma and potentially other infectious diseases doesn't get a lot of attention. And that is one of the things I like about this study, is that it brings another variable into the equation of why male infertility rates might be increasing. I certainly don't think it is a major cause, but I think it's worth investigating based on all the evidence that we talked about today that is emerging. I think it certainly warrants further investigation. The facts we know: the parasites can invade human testes, but symptomatic disease remains very rare. So in my mind, it's still unclear how big of a problem Toxoplasma might be in the context of male fertility. Now, current studies showing defects in the sperm of infected men as well as other animals, they're just a little too small to draw firm conclusions right now, but I believe they are enough to warrant further study. Another thing that kind of gives me pause: some reports suggest that rates of toxoplasmosis, especially in high-income countries, have not been increasing, and in some cases have been coming down a little bit. And that's been happening very recently over the past few decades. And during that time, when Toxoplasma rates are either stagnant or coming down, male infertility has been climbing upwards. So Toxoplasma might be part of the puzzle, but I don't think it's going to be the main driver. Other culprits that have been advanced include obesity, poor diet, environmental toxins, things like that. But I do think Toxoplasma, other infectious diseases as well, like gonorrhea, chlamydia, they are underappreciated potential contributors to this decline in male fertility. So I don't think they can be ignored, but I don't want to overinterpret some of the things that we talked about today and prematurely conclude that Toxoplasma is like one of the main drivers of this problem.
Right. Is this something that your lab might take up?
Well, we did do some collaborative research that investigated Toxoplasma in the prostate. So we hope to continue along those lines of investigation. Obviously, funding is required to do that, and that is getting increasingly difficult. But hopefully with these sort of studies coming to the surface and potentially pointing to a very real problem, maybe that will convince reviewers that this work needs to be investigated.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I know this is very difficult, but how do you prevent getting the parasite in the first place?
There's actually some really good steps you can take to try to avoid Toxoplasma. And they're very effective based on some of the high-income countries we talked about. Educational campaigns have been launched. A lot more people are aware of Toxoplasma these days than they were in the past. And in those countries, you can see the seroprevalence rates coming down. So like I said, we don't have a cure, but these preventative measures do seem to be working quite a bit. What are they? Well, prompt cleaning of the litter box is one. When these oocysts hit the atmosphere, they need about 24 hours to fully mature and become infectious. So if you clean the litter box promptly and safely, you can minimize contracting Toxoplasma from your kitten or cat. Now, that said, you do want to take special care if you're pregnant. And if you're pregnant, I wouldn't change the litter box at all. If you have someone else who can take care of it, it's simply just not worth the risk. Other areas where cats go to the bathroom should also be avoided or very carefully analyzed before going there, such as sandboxes or maybe in the garden. Some people go so far as to recommend that people who do garden wear masks or gloves, or at least wash their hands very thoroughly. Subsequently, you should wash your fruits and vegetables thoroughly to make sure there's no oocysts on them. You also want to cook your food properly, avoid raw shellfish. It's just a good general rule of thumb to wash your hands thoroughly before eating. If you do all of these things, the chances of you acquiring Toxoplasma, in my mind, are very small.
Okay. I consider it a little bit larger because it's so ubiquitous that something's going to slip through the cracks at some point, But,
no, it's understandable. And
yeah.
like you said, it's out there in the environment. It can be very difficult to avoid, and we certainly shouldn't make anyone who acquired Toxoplasma feel guilty or anything, because it is very easily transmissible. And as we discussed, there's many ways this parasite can get around.
Well, I'll give you a chance to get any final thoughts on this.
I don't want anyone to panic about their cat. Every time I give one of these interviews or a lecture, people get a little paranoid about their cat or their neighbor's cat, and you don't need to stress out about that. There are safe ways to care for our beloved feline friends that minimize transmission of Toxoplasma. And I want to reassure people you're not likely to get it from petting a cat or even from a scratch of a cat. Cat scratch fever is a thing, but that's a bacterial infection. It's not Toxoplasma. And with regard to final thoughts, Robert, I appreciate the opportunity to tell people to campaign for more research. Infectious diseases cannot be underestimated. So we need to support the agencies that fund laboratories like our own that try to investigate how impactful these parasites are in our lives or in our pets' lives, and come up with new medicines and treatments to combat them when they cause problems.
Very good. And again, the study is titled Adverse Impact of Acute Toxoplasma gondii Infection on Human Spermatozoa. And I'll link to it in the show notes. In addition, I'll link to Dr. Sullivan's article in the conversation about this topic for people that want to go ahead and check it out. It's really, really interesting stuff. And I want to thank you once again, Dr. Bill Sullivan, for sharing your time, expertise, and perspective on this topic. I appreciate it, sir.
Thank you very much, Robert.
You're welcome.